Mark Nathan. Was born in New York City but was raised in Wilmington, Delaware. I started playing guitar pretty young. When I was about 9, my grandmother gave me a guitar for Christmas, a nylon string guitar. And I think that I was inspired to play mostly by my father, because my father played really just as a hobby. He was a chemical engineer, but that was my inspiration to start playing. And my brother was 2 years older than me, played drums. So we had a room in the house where we just had our instruments, so I always had someone to play with, and I think that was a big part of maybe what made it catch on for me at such a young age. And then I moved away to school, moved to Austin, Texas after college, and I've been there ever since and have played in a lot of bands in that area, and now I'm happy to be with Heartless Bastards.
I'm Jesse. I play bass. You know, did high school in Pennsylvania, seeing tons of punk rock bands, and you know, always knew I wanted to travel and play music, and ended up in a long series of rock and roll bands to varying degrees of success.
My name is Erika Wennerstrom, and I play guitar and sing in Heartless Bastards. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, and I started the band in Cincinnati, and then it's sort of relocated to Austin. I guess we've been around for about 10 years now, so half of that time's been in Austin. And I picked up guitar. My dad sent me one out of the blue, an acoustic guitar. I can't remember if it was my birthday or Christmas, but it was a real surprise. He knew I wanted to sing and play music, but yeah, I hadn't expressed an interest in guitar, but I'm really glad he did. My dad sent me recently recordings of my grandmother, who I had no idea was a singer. I've never met her in my life. She was born in 1897. She had passed away before I was born, but she sang on some recordings in 1928, which I've been reading about recording recently, and a lot of the earlier ones were done on aluminum, and that technology was, you know, it's sort of very brief before it went to tape, but my dad found a company that you can send old aluminum discs to, and he had it transferred onto digital and sent me recordings of my grandmother singing. So it's been really neat. We've been playing it before we go on stage at shows recently. I've just been kind of focused so much more on her voice and the sound and the tones and melody, and I guess I hadn't really thought about it until now. I have a feeling they're not in English.
My name's Dave Colvin, and I'm from Dayton, Ohio. I started playing drums pretty young, when I was 10, in the school band program, and pretty much stuck with it all the way through college. But like, as rock and roll influences, like, it's real inspired by Dayton rock scene, you know, a small community. It was kind of tight knit, like bands like the Breeders and Guided by Voices, I think, had a big influence in a rock and roll sense on me wanting to play that kind of music. Yeah, Brainiac. There's just and just other local bands. I just felt real connected, just because it was such a small scene. But I felt like there was, you know, a lot of creativity going on for such a small scene that I wanted to be a part of it. So I think that's why I got started playing in rock bands.
I was in a band. I played bass for a while. It was called Sheezus. It was we started as an all-girl group, and then we needed a drummer, and female drummers are kind of hard to find. It's hard to find a really good drummer in general, and then the fact that there's so few female drummers to begin with. So Dave ended up joining, and thought it was awesome, and we're playing together to this day. Mark did a tour with us doing sound when we were still a three-piece, and and we got along really well with Mark, and we were looking for another member, and had heard through some mutual friends that he was a great guitarist, and we were like, hey, you want to join the band? And we just had a feeling it would work out, and then we got together, and it did. Yeah, Dave started out in the first live formation, and then he had moved, and but Dave and Jesse were on the original demo I did. I guess that would have been in like the last week of December of 2002.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was great. It really came full circle. With the third album, it was sort of a different situation. I didn't have a live band. There were session musicians because I'd moved to Austin and sort of started over, and I hadn't found these guys yet, a live band. So, I mean, honestly, I had moved to Austin after a breakup, and I was a little bit of a mess at that time. So it was a little, yeah, it just kind of, I don't know how I got that album done. But with this album, we've all worked together live, and had worked together at that point for several years, and we finally got to work on an actual recording together, and you know, so I think there was a lot of enthusiasm and creative ideas we tossed around, and with Jim as well, and having a producer, and me being a little bit more focused on this record. I think I find it to be our strongest, and it's the one I'm most proud of. We worked with Jim Mino from Spoon on it. He produced it, and yeah, he was great to work with. And we did a tour on it before we went in the studio. We wanted to just feel really comfortable with the material, and it made the process of recording go really smooth.
We spent a while working on just the songs, the arrangements, in a quieter setting at my house, actually, where she brought in all the songs and then we kind of flushed them out. And I felt like it was a nice pace for that. Like, we had some time in between working on it where we'd go back and tweak stuff and then get back together and have it a little more polished each time. Jim sat in on a couple of those sessions, and so things kind of worked out in a nice organic way. And then we, like she said, we toured on it, so that it was like even more solid by the time we went into the studio and did it.
I tend to write the songs on my own, sort of in solitude, and then I bring them into the band. So yeah, I traveled sort of all around. I went to West Texas to a friend's ranch outside Marfa, and I worked on some of the last album there, and I drove out to the East Coast, and I would stop and visit family and friends along the way. I went to that festival, All Tomorrow's Parties, when it was still up in the Catskills, and then I stayed up in the Catskills in a cabin till I had a weird moment and decided I should get out of there. Maybe I was in the next Norman Bates spot. I don't know if I ever told you guys that, but yeah. And
what's the story?
Oh, I just have never been so frightened by somebody ever.
Yeah.
But it was just a feeling. I walked into this like different place to rent. I needed to find a cheaper place to stay, and the person just, I felt like they looked right through me, and I've just never felt that way. And I mean, it was probably nothing, but you know, I mean, we do have an instinct for a reason, and I just went with it. I sort of drove around and just tried to find inspiration. And I didn't get a lot of writing done on that trip, so at first I was kind of like, well, that was a waste in a sense. But then I realized when I wrote the album that a lot of those experiences ended up being on the album.